In this very curriculum-focused month that we're doing now, I want to talk a little bit about layering project questions. So I often talk about curriculum building around a driving project question. So this is really driving the entire unit. This is engaging. This is exciting. And I have shared some examples before, some templates, some sentence starters. And I'm going to share those again. But what I've realized is that some students are going to struggle with some of the template questions. And I think the reason for that is that it's layered. So I'm imagining, what if we take them along a progression of a particular question and we kind of move from, okay, I'm first stating something, I'm choosing a side, and then I'm getting more nuanced, and then I'm getting to the point where I'm really actively thinking about what could be different. Almost like, we talk a lot about creating for civic action, right? Or activist projects that the units will culminate in. And so it's okay, so we want to make sure that students are able to do that, but they can't really do that right off the bat. So throughout the course of a unit, let's take them through 3 stages where we really have a layered essential question or project question. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here is what I want to share with you. 3 questions, and think of these as sentence starters or project question stems in terms of the layer of understanding. So we have layer 1, 2, and 3. The first question that you're going to take students through in the unit, and this could be literally in the hook lesson, day 1. Is it better to have X than Y? For example, is it better to have freedom than safety, right? Freedom is in one side of the room, safety is in the other. Go ahead and do a human barometer. Show me where you stand. This is staking a claim. This is just having students choose a side. And then, of course, right, being able to, throughout the unit, amass and synthesize and deeply understand the evidence that supports that claim. And of course, day 1 students could choose a claim, and then later on in the unit realize, hey, actually, I don't believe that because the evidence doesn't support it, or I've changed my view, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this is something you could use day 1 and early on in the unit. If you think your students are going to struggle with layers 2 and 3, you could, and I certainly have, just use layer 1 as your question for the entire unit. Is it better to have X than Y? Students are answering that question with a concrete claim and synthesizing the evidence they learned in the unit as the final project. Totally cool, right? But that is kind of like an initial layer. I choose a stance, I use the evidence to support it. Now, the second layer from there is a little more nuanced. What is the formula for? So for example, in a class where we're talking about freedom versus safety as polar opposites, someone, perhaps the whole class eventually, will realize, you know what, we can't really exclude one. We have to have both, but it's a balance, right? Or more specifically, it's a formula. And here's what that formula specifically looks like. So it could be the formula is 80% freedom and 20% safety or something, right? Or it could be even more specific. I think there's room here to figure out what works for you, figure out what works for your students, enable that student voice and co-creation of I'm going to interpret the formula idea as literally anything. We could have various things being multiplied and divided and whatever, to really capture the essence of what they want to get at. But there's a lot more room for nuance here. Then the third level is really thinking that civic mindedness, what is the action step that we could take as a community to solve a particular problem? Or we identify a problem, which is usually, right, this idea of, is it better to have freedom versus safety, is typically rooted in a conversation. It might be about a presidential election coming up or something, and this is the issue being debated, and at the heart of that is this value tension of freedom versus safety. So what would it look like if we applied this formula from layer 2? So you said it would be 80%, freedom and 20% safety. What would it look like if we did that, right? Or what would it look like if we struck a beautiful balance regardless of what that was, right? So you're painting the picture of the future that is more equitable, more centered in intersectional justice, whatever it is. You're action planning, you're dreaming at that point, which effectively requires you to have moved through layer 1 and 2. Kind of wish I thought of this idea while I was teaching. And so now I'm just really excited for someone who is actively teaching, or for my work with curriculum teams, or my work with departments, or your work with departments as an instructional leader, to make this come to life and let me know how it goes. So I would love to think through this more with you, share your ideas of how you want to implement it, how you have, and how it's gone. And I will share back with you once I've done this with a bunch of people and can come back to the table with some real case studies.